God says, in effect, that if there is one fine thing about the world, as far as men are concerned, is that it cannot be explained. He insists on the inexplicableness of everything. He goes even further and insists on the positive and palpable unreason of things. A quote from the book of Job. Hast thou sent the rain upon the desert where no man is, and upon the wilderness wherein there is no man, and so on. To startle man, God becomes for an instant a blasphemer. One might almost say that God becomes for an instant an atheist. He unrolls before Job a long panorama of created things, the horse, the eagle, the raven, the wild ass. Incidentally, I don't know what this is, it sounds crazy. The peacock, the ostrich, the crocodile. He so describes each of them that it sounds like a monster walking in the sun. The whole is a sort of psalm or rhapsody on the sense of wonder. The maker of all things is astonished at the things he has himself made. End of quote. So you got it. God is here no longer the miraculous exception which guarantees the normality of the universe, the unexplainable X who enables us to explain everything else. He is, on the contrary, himself overwhelmed by the miracle of his own creation. Upon a closer look, there is nothing normal in our universe. Everything, even every small thing, is a miraculous exception. Viewed from a proper perspective, every normal thing is a monstrosity. Say, why should we take horses as normal and the unicorn as a miraculous exception? Even a horse, the most ordinary thing in the world, is a shattering miracle. And I think that this blasphemous God is the God of modern science, since modern science is sustained precisely by such an attitude of wondering at the most obvious. In short, modern science is on the side of believing in anything. It's one of the lessons of theory of relativity or quantum physics, not that modern science undermines our most elementary natural attitude and compels us to believe, accept the most nonsensical things. To clarify this confusion, I think that Jacques Lacan's logic of the so-called non-all can be of some help here. Lacan distinguishes the so-called masculine side, universality, all, universal law, grounded in exception, and non-all, where there is no exception, but because of this, no universality. Chesterton obviously relies on the masculine side of universality and its constitutive exception. Everything obeys natural causality with the exception of God, the central mystery. The logic of modern science is, on the contrary, feminine. First, it is materialist, accepting the axiom that nothing escapes natural causality. There is nothing which cannot be accounted for by rational explanation. However, the other side of this materialist axiom is that not all is rational, not in the sense that there is something irrational, something that escapes rational causality, but in the sense that it is the totality of rational causal order which is in itself inconsistent, and in this formal sense, of course, irrational non-all. Only this non-all guarantees the proper opening of the scientific discourse to surprises, to the emergencies of the unthinkable. Who in the 19th century could have imagined things like relativity theory or quantum physics? So, perhaps the incompatibility between Derrida, I want to give you now an example of this difference, between Derrida and Deleuze, I think can also be accounted in these terms. What makes Derrida masculine in the sense of the logic of universality and its exception is the persistence throughout Derrida's work of totalization through exception. The search for a post-metaphysical way of thinking, for the break out of the metaphysical closure, presupposes the violent gesture of universalization, of leveling, equalization, unification of all the field of intra-metaphysical struggles. You know, the story of all attempts to break out of metaphysics, from Kierkegaard to Marx, from Nietzsche to Heidegger, from Levinas to Claude Lévi-Strauss, ultimately remain within the horizon of the metaphysics of presence. This same gesture is clearly discernible also in Heidegger, for whom all reversals of metaphysics, from Marx to Nietzsche, from Husserl to Sartre, remain within the horizon of the forgetting of being, ultimately caught in the technological nihilism as the accomplishment of metaphysics, as well as, incidentally, for Adorno and Horkheimer, for whom the entire Western thought is totalized as the gradual deployment of the dialectics of enlightenment, which culminates in today's administered world. As some people used to say, from Plato to NATO, from Plato to NATO is a straight line. And incidentally, it is this aspect that I also find problematic in our good friend Giorgio Agamben. I can say something critical about him because he's not here, and I'm a human, warm person. I don't want to offend people face to face, so I'm saying this when he's not here. No, seriously, doesn't he do the same thing? Like, what narrative is he telling us? That from the very beginning of the Western philosophy, there is a certain line which culminates in a kind of a negative eschatology in today's Homo sacer concentration camp logic. That's the truth of the entire development, and all attempts to break out get caught into it. So we just have to wait for the reversal. I'm tempted to claim that perhaps it is this very gesture of violent equalization of the entire field, against which you then formulate your own position of exception, which is the most elementary gesture of metaphysics. This is for me what we should maybe drop. This idea of everything is part of metaphysics of presence, forgetfulness of being, except your own position from which you totalize it. In clear contrast to Derrida, this gesture of violent equalization is, as far as I can see, totally absent in Gilles Deleuze's work. Deleuze's gaze upon the tradition of philosophy is somehow like the gaze of God upon creation in God's reply to Job. There is no norm which would allow us to nivelize the field. Miracles are everywhere. Every phenomenon, perceived properly from a position which estranges it from its standard context, is an exception. This is what I like, again, in Deleuze. He's far from the idea, all hitherto is bad. No, he says, let's look at even Plato, who appears to be his enemy, even Kant, Spinoza. Everywhere you see an exception. Everywhere you see a miracle. Catholic Church, on the contrary, was, as a rule, always on the side of the common sense realism and universal natural explanation. From Chesterton to Pope John Paul II, who endorsed both evolutionism, with the exception of the unique moment when God imparts to humans the immortal soul. It's always the same logic of, do you know that John Paul was for evolutionism? He said, perfect, it explains everything, except that moment when Adam and Eve, blah, blah, no? Or even contemporary cosmology. John Paul II said, it's wonderful, but don't mess with Big Bang. That's the exception that God intervened there. No wonder that many neo-Thomists noted a weird similarity between their own ontology and the ontology of the Stalinist dialectical materialism, because both were defending a version of naive realism. Objects, the way we perceive them, exist really outside our perception, independently of it, and so on. This is why both Catholic philosophy and dialectical materialism had such problems with the so-called open ontology of quantum mechanics. That is to say, how are we to interpret the so-called principle of uncertainty in quantum physics, which prohibits us from attaining full knowledge of particles at the quantum level? We cannot measure velocity and position of a particle, as we all know, at the same time. For Einstein, this principle of uncertainty simply demonstrates that quantum physics does not provide a full description of reality, that there must be some unknown feature missing